can put it up early. So start recording. I'll add people as they continue filtering in. Nobody else. Nobody else. Nope. There's another one. One more. Hold on. So if you go through my Brady, I put all of the hyperlinks on my Brady as well as the date and times. So from here on out, all of the Zoom meeting links will be the same number, that 268 or whatever it is. And then the password's always the same in case the link doesn't work. So 239. So if you ever need to get on, that will be the link that we will use. And then the EMT one, exclamation point, everything capitalized. Go over some things that we're kind of learning so far with the My Brady. It's difficult to do quizzes on phones. Found that people are having some issues like answering the questions because they have to move the screen around and it might change. So you click on A and then you move stuff around and it changes it to a B, a C, or a D. So then you get it wrong. So it's definitely better to use it on a bigger screen. If you guys have a laptop, it's preferred to do all of the homework assignments, all the quizzes and stuff on a laptop. And then you can do the book using the app. So there's a free app. I messaged it out, e-text, where you can look at your entire book on your phone or on your tablet. But try to use a laptop or a computer for the actual like discussion boards and quizzes, just because it's going to be a lot easier. If you feel like you need some support, I know we just went through 4 chapters in a short amount of time. These are pretty small chapters. It's gonna get a lot busier from here. Just tell you that. Module 3 is the biggest, and it is the meat and potatoes of EMS. It is probably the hardest one because you're gonna have your head-to-toe assessments. You guys are gonna have to remember an acronym called DCAT BTLS. There is a lot of information in there. You are given 4 days to do it, but it's still chapters 9 all the way through 17. So that is a lot of reading and memorizing. But if you guys are having any trouble struggling with stuff, feeling overloaded, definitely give Mandy and Ashley a call. That's what they're there for. They're there to help you guys. They're able to kind of explain things differently than the book might, because sometimes people don't learn well just reading. Like I don't do well if I read something, I'm like, well, I just read it and none of it makes sense. I don't do well with reading. But if I can see it or somebody can explain it to me in better ways, I retain it significantly better. So feel free to contact either of them and they will help guide you through the chapters. I'll give you a little breakdown of the chapters, like the most important stuff that you're going to need to know for your exam. So your exam is due by tomorrow at midnight. Most of your exams they're available the same day as the Zoom meeting, but then they were going to be due the same night at midnight, but we added it in to where they're available for the next day. So you guys can get it done on Sunday if you need to by midnight, for those that can't do stuff on Saturday. Hold on. I don't know if you know Steph Russell's number. Can someone help her?
I do. Yeah, I got Stephanie.
Okay, she's having issues getting in.
Yeah, I got her.
All right, so I'll kind of go through each of the chapters. The biggest thing, so like chapter 1 is kind of our EMS history. There's a lot of dates in there, and honestly, like 14 years of doing this, I can't tell you exactly when the dates are like important or prominent. I just know in the 60s, they started making like like CPR a thing and started making actual EMTs part of a pre-hospital thing. If you guys ever watch the TV show, an old TV show called Emergency, that actually helped really stem a lot of what we have for EMS now. Because back in the day, EMTs just basically drove a hearse, and they would pick people up, and both people would be in the front seat, and they'd throw the person in the back, and they'd drive them to the hospital. If the person lived, awesome. They'd take them into an ER. If they didn't, they were already in a hearse. They could just drive them right to the morgue. So with the development of medics being able to actually do stuff in the back, you can actually see that with that show. It's pretty realistic, besides some of the weird scenarios and some of their weird humor, but for the most part, that's exactly how the medical kind of came to be. They were given these like short, this is how you do this is how you do that kind of classes, and it was kind of up to them to save lives. And then that's where the development of on-call medical direction, calling a hospital and saying, hey, guide us on what we can do here, give us some guidance even though we're nowhere near a hospital. So that's kind of the rundown of like EMS history. It is based off of DOT. It's controlled a lot by the not Alaska, but National Highway Safety Act of the 60s. Also, they developed the National Registry of EMTs, which the rest of the nation, except a few states, will follow the National Registry. They started to develop more of a standard. So you guys will see the definition in there of standard of care, standard of practice. That is like the bare minimum. That is the standard of how most EMS services should be. SOPs are going to be your operating procedures, or SOGs is going to be your guidelines. That's going to be your company or your service is going to have that. But when it comes to medical standards, that's mostly guided by the National Registry and what they created back then. Also part of the EMS system is understand 911. So 911 came about because it was too confusing for people to call multiple numbers for multiple agencies. When I went over to Italy, my sister and I were trying to find the fire department, and we found a police officer and we asked him where the fire station was. We happened to be at the train station at the time, and my Italian was not existent, and his English was very poor. So he heard, where's the fire department, and assumed the train station was on fire and started freaking out. He actually did not know where the fire department was. He could not give us directions to where it was. We had to get a cab to get us a ride there. The fire department, when we finally did get there, didn't know where the police station was, and they didn't know where the ambulance service was located. And so it was really confusing to me that these entities here in the United States, they kind of work together and talk together, and they're all part of a 911. They have no contact with each other. There's actually like 3 different numbers that people would have to call. If their house was being broken into, someone got stabbed during the robbery, and then it caught on fire, they would essentially have to call 3 different numbers to get the appropriate care, because it was just really, really bizarre to have that kind of disconnect. But here, you call one service, 911, they can track down what kind of service that you need and dispatch it out. So that's also part of our EMS that we have here in the United States and in Canada. Trying to get it all just one universal number. The healthcare system in your textbook is going to cover National Registry, and it's going to have the National EMS scope. So we do not have the national scope, which is going to be EMR, or Emergency Medical Responder, which is very similar to our ETT, but it's nationally recognized. Then they have their EMT, then they have their advanced EMT, and then they have their paramedic. We do not have those specific titles. What we have is the ETT, the EMT 1, 2, 3, and then MICP, which is Mobile Intensive Care Paramedic. So we do have a little bit of different terminology, and we do have 3 stages of EMT. So EMT 1, which is what you guys are taking, the EMT2, which is going to be like IV therapy and IV medications, and then EMT3, which is going to be your cardiac level. We are currently looking at transitioning to a little bit more advanced to match the National Registry, but as of right now, that's kind of how the difference is. So the basic first aid, life-saving medications and stuff, to IV therapy, to cardiac therapy. So in the book, when it talks about advanced, think of that as almost like the 3 level. And so there really isn't much of a 1, 2, 3 in the National Registry. So that hopefully that helps with any of those kind of questions. Our responsibilities as medical providers is to keep maintenance up of our equipment and to be a patient advocate. So what is a patient advocate? Does everybody understand what that means? Anybody want to chime in? Tell me your definition of a patient advocate.
Someone who speaks up for the patient and shows that they listened and they care and they want to get their point across to who you're transferring them to.
Okay. Anybody
You're trying
else
to do the best.
try to do the best for them?
Yeah, you're trying to do what they can't seem to do and look out for their best interests and take care of their issues.
Mm-hmm. So what if grandma's at home and she's got a bunch of loose rugs around? So part of our help is to maybe educate her family on getting the rugs to be more secured. Or you notice that grandma and grandpa can't get out of the chair very well and we keep getting called there for a lift assist. There are actually programs out there that can help grandma and grandpa get those fancy chairs that actually help pick them up. They're these like electric lazy boys that actually help them stand up. So that could be part of our patient advocacy. And it's also doing what they want to do. So maybe the children of grandma and grandpa are trying to force grandma and grandpa to do stuff, like trying to force them into the home or force them to go to the hospital. We need to be the advocate for grandma. If grandma doesn't want to go and grandma is of sound mind, we're not going to allow the parents or the grandma and grandpa's kids to kind of force grandma into doing things. We can try to educate grandma, but if grandma is making a decision on her own and she wants to be home and she is able to make that decision, we can't force her, even if her kids want her to. Does that make sense? So the patient advocacy is doing what's best for them, but they have to have their say. It's their life. They need to be able to make the decisions, and we need to support them. So look out for the patient's needs, do what's best for them, and ensuring their wishes are fulfilled. Medically, don't fulfill all their wishes. We're not part of the Make-A-Wish Foundation. We also deal with a lot of death and dying, which can be a lot of stress on EMS professionals. And we too will go through the different stages of death. Understand those different stages. So understand the difference between your denial, your anger, your depression, what bargaining is, as it's different than anger and it's different than depression, and then down to acceptance. And it's not just death. An end of a marriage, like that's a death of a marriage. That's a death of a relationship. So people can go through all of those stages. So think about that. It's not the stages of death or dying. It's just the stages of grief. So losing a family member, being fired from a job, people will be like, they don't know what happened. They'll be angry that they got fired. They'll try to be like, please, I'll do whatever it takes. Just don't let me lose my job. Those type things. So it's not just death and dying, and it could be yourself and it could be your coworkers. So be mindful that people grieve in different ways, and it doesn't have to be in order, and you can skip. You don't have to go through each one of them. You can actually skip anger. You can actually skip bargaining. But hopefully through time, people will get through acceptance. So be aware that people all have different stages of grief. They all kind of cope with it differently, and you need to cope appropriately. And we need to learn to not take it out on ourselves. EMS professionals, people in the medical field in general, have really high suicide rates and really high alcohol and substance abuse issues. We have this stigma that we're in healthcare. So if someone finds out that we're on like an antidepressant or anything like that, there's going to be this stigma that, well, if you're sick, then you can't help others. And that is absolutely not the case. There is no reason that a medical professional cannot be on antidepressants or different medications because you're getting help. So it's better to accept it and get help than to try to hide it and go through this alone. So just be aware that there is a lot of stress. A lot of it is involved around kids. A lot of it is involved around death. So I do have links posted from the crisis text line because I do a lot of crisis text line counseling when I'm free. And we do get a lot of emergency responder type things on the text line. So feel free to use it. There's a lot of other resources. There is always support out there. So just letting you know, this is the very first module. It will get stressful. And when you do EMS, it can be a very stressful job. So there is resources out there for you, and don't believe that stigma.
Can I chime in for just a second?
Absolutely.
Especially for those that are in small villages, you're gonna be working on family, friends, next door neighbors. You're even here in the valley, we know it's a small community and we know who each other are, and that also creates stress. So just be mindful of that as well.
Any questions, comments, or anything so far? That's the first chapter, I think.
May I say something about the grieving?
Yeah.
Also, don't forget with the grieving process that people can bounce back and forth among the steps as well. It's not going to be a boom, boom, boom. They can skip, but they can also bounce back and forth.
Absolutely. And people can actually be in one stage for a very long time and then move to another one for a short time. And it could be something kind of, I hate to use the word like triggered because that's a big thing right now and it annoys me, but there could be something that kind of triggers them to revert back to a previous stage. So some of these things are kind of lifelong. Like how do you get over somebody that's dead? You don't really get over it, you just cope with it differently. All right, next chapter I think is like body mechanics. There is a lot of heavy lifting that we got to do. Our gear is not light. The monitors themselves can be quite heavy, and then you're trying to balance an oxygen bag, and you got the monitor, and a lot of it is planning. Plan ahead. If you can use a gurney to carry your stuff into the house, absolutely do it. But remember, what you carry out needs to be carried back in, and now you've got a patient taking up the entire gurney. So be aware of how much stuff is going to weigh, how big your patient's going to be, and how far you're going to go. It's a lot better to park as close as you can, and it's a lot better to have like the minimum that you need and not the whole shebang of everything. But it's a lot better than running back and forth to the ambulance for things that you forgot. So pay attention to the page and talk to each other before. That's a lot of the pre-planning, is to figure out like, all right, you're gonna grab the airway bag, you're gonna grab this. Decide on those roles as you approach the call so you don't have to go back and forth and get equipment. The stuff can be quite heavy. Honestly, I've been a gopher before. When I was a brand new EMT1, that was my job, was a lot of go for this and go for that. So be aware that you may be a gopher in the first stages of your EMS career. I've had experiences where it was just a small oxygen bag, where it was literally just some oxygen equipment and a tank, and then something that we called a first in bag, which was just a mini ambulance with backpack straps, and it probably weighed a good 40 or 50 pounds. And it was so packed that you had to squish it down and zip it tight. Oh, it was horrible. But it had everything in there to at least spend the first 10 minutes on scene. But man, it was awful. So it just depends on your service. Just be aware that some of that stuff is going to weigh a lot and it's going to take up space. And it's not real kind to put some heavy stuff on the legs of your patient. So there's a lot of safe lifting. There's the green zone. You can get all sorts of information about the green zone. Lifting with your back is not going to be beneficial for you for very long. It'll wear your back out real quick. Your legs are strong. Your legs do so much lifting. Make them do the heavy work. There's less bones, there's less ligaments. If you think of your back, you've got all these different bones and all these different ligaments. If you're gonna pop one out, I would rather pop a leg one out than even one of my back ones, because you do so much minute movement with your back. So save your back. You can always work on your quads. There's a lot of skill videos in the e-textbook on appropriate lifting techniques. Get more manpower. You can always turn people back, but you can't make up that time that you've lost. I did break my shoulder lifting a 400-pound patient. It put me out of service for 6 months. I wasn't allowed to do anything. I had an avulsion fracture of my humeral head. We picked up a 400-pound patient. I thought we had enough people. We had one for each corner. I ended up with 2 crews, so 4 people. Nope, I didn't hurt my back. I appropriately lifted, but the actual bone broke and it completely took me out. So even 4 people was not enough, and it just wasn't my day for my shoulder. So things happen unexpectedly. We pre-prepared for a heavy person, but it just wasn't enough for us apparently. So it happens. Let's see. Use a stair chair if you've got that kind of equipment. They've got some awesome equipment out. When I first started, we had this gurney that you had to lift from the ground, and then I'm only 5'4". To lift it into the ambulance, I had to hold all the weight here and then stand on my tippy toes to get it into load position. There's still services that use that kind of stuff, and I feel for you. We just got an electric gurney on the slope like 2 years ago, and that is a lifesaver. We got it in the burrow, and it was awesome. They're heavy. So every time there's a plus, there's always a negative side. So even though the gurney itself is electric and you can pick up a 500-pound patient with just the push of a button, if there's an issue or you have to move it through some thick mud or snow, it's heavy. And if you have the patient all the way up, it makes it super tippy. So then you have to lower it down. And you're going to have to lift the patient up and then this heavy gurney. So if you have a 300-pound patient on a 100-pound gurney, you better have some support because it can get real tough on your back. And everybody's a different height, so it's hard to find somebody that is bent down at the right height and the other person's holding it up here or way down low. Because there's a couple guys, I know Ben is a lot taller than me, ginormo man. I don't know how tall you are, Ben, what, 5'9", 5'10", but I'm 5'4", so it doesn't work real well.
Hey, Bree,
Yeah,
when I talk about the back part,
yeah. Oh,
you
yeah,
yes.
yeah.
Yeah, be
You want
very
to tell us about you?
What she's talking about is all true. I'm old enough. When I started at EMS, we still actually had the 2-man cot. You had to lower all the way to the ground, stand on the side, lift up, and put in the ambulance. So I started with that, and then moved into the ones where you manually lifted everything and not lifting properly, pushing things like I shouldn't, twisting and reaching for the heavy patients. Last February, I had my lower back fused because I blew 2 discs out 16 years before that and held off as long as I could. You don't want to go through that at all. So pay very close attention to how you move and lift. And Bree can attest, she's watched me turn now on scenes where I turn my whole body. I don't twist my upper torso to do anything anymore. But it's a big thing, and it will catch up to you real fast.
I'm at year 11 with a lower back problem.
Yeah, I went
And-
16 years and finally decided it was time because I was dragging my foot when I walked. It got that bad.
Yeah, it doesn't get better. It usually just gets worse with gravity and with age. So if you keep it as strong as you can early, it'll last you a lot longer. And there's so many advances in medicine when it comes to our limbs, but the back, they're like, I don't know, fuse it. Like there's not a whole lot they can do. They can't really replace anything. You can get a knee replacement, but you can't replace your spine.
Nope,
There's
it's
too
just
much.
one chunk now.
Yep, there's too much stuff going on there that they haven't. There's too much they can mess up. So keep your back safe. All right. So I did a lot of medical legal. There is an entire presentation that I did on med legal. This is going to be very important. It might not be in. I don't have people in the waiting room. Not that I can see. I do not see people in my waiting room. Sorry.
No, and I've got 26 participants. I got nobody on the chat stuff.
I don't know. Sorry. So medical legal, there is a lot of things that can happen if you don't cover your butt. And I try to really emphasize that on the PowerPoint as well as in your reading. So the reason there's a PowerPoint is because there's Alaska specific stuff. We do not have like a DNR. So do not resuscitate. What we actually have is called a Comfort One. So a DNR is a do not resuscitate. My heart stops, don't do squat, do not resuscitate me. With the Comfort One, which is kind of cool, is I can choose hold on. There he is. Okay. Ty's here. I see him. Sorry.
Bree, we've got somebody asking where those PowerPoints are.
Okay. I will show you guys. I will actually share my screen here. So let's see. Share my screen so you guys can see it. All right, you guys see this? Yeah. All right, so you go to your main menu, go to your course home. You can go to communication tools and your document sharing. And then all of our PowerPoints are right up here. So you can click on the PowerPoint. There's like chapter 27. Your assessment priorities is going to be kind of attached to your module 3. Basic terminology, I think that's the next module, module 2. This one's chapter 35. You've got some airway stuff all the way down to your med legal. So this one here I created. If you're not able to see the PowerPoints, if you're not able to view them because you don't have a paid subscription, there are resources. If you Google it, you should be able to open the PowerPoint because I never pay for Microsoft Word or Office. You can still access them. If you guys are having issues, I can email you the link separately, but try to get them from here first. So your med legal ethics, it's going to cover all of the Alaska stuff. We do have some other specific Alaska things that it talks about. It gives the Alaska resources for childhood awareness and abuse reporting. That is your responsibility to make that report. You cannot say, oh, my partner was there too, she's going to make the report. It is your responsibility to get it in. It doesn't matter if there was 4 people on the call and all 4 people made the report. It's actually better. It actually is more history, more stories, because everybody's going to have a little bit more detail that they remember. And it's kind of more evidence to help that child. So go over that PowerPoint. It's also going to cover torts, which there are intentional torts, and there's so our intentional torts is going to be our abandonment, assault and battery, false imprisonment, which is kind of like kidnapping, and then any of our defamation. So go over know those different torts, know the difference between assault and battery, know the difference in your defamations. So who can tell me the difference between the defamations or what the defamation is?
Libel is stuff that you know is untrue that's written, and slander is stuff that you know is untrue that's spoken verbally.
Absolutely. What's the difference between assault and battery?
Assault is as little as the causing the fear of harm, and battery is actual physical harm that you caused.
Yep. So how I remembered that when I was at EMT1 is it chucks salt at you, it's not going to hurt you. It's just threatening you that I'm throwing stuff at you. But if I chuck a battery at you, it's going to hurt. So assault is more of the threat of endangerment, and battery is the actual physical contact. So that's absolutely right. How I remembered libel and slander. Libel is an L. It kind of looks like a pencil. So it's written, and slander has an S for spoken. How magazines get away with it, like the National Enquirer, and how Elvis just had, I don't know, a baby with Lady Gaga, is because they put an anonymous resource or anonymous tip. They don't have to tell you who did it, but they're going off the assumption that that person told them the truth. So that's how they can get away with it, because they're like, well, he told me to. Well, who's he? Oh, he's anonymous. I can't tell you. So that's how anything that says an anonymous tip or anonymous source, I don't necessarily believe that that was truthful. So, because that's how they can get away with saying those type things. So again, your PowerPoint topics are here. You have, I'm still sharing it, yes? Sharing the screen, okay. Miscellaneous handouts. So you guys will have your rule of nines, an example of your PCR, the background check regulations. This is to become an EMT. They don't want people that are not supposed to be medical people. If you are a registered sex offender, you should probably drop out of the class now. They also have regulations on DUIs. So look up your rules on becoming an EMS provider. There's also a PDF on HIPAA. There's an entire section on HIPAA and what is allowed to be disclosed about a patient and what's protected. It's a way of having a patient advocacy. We have to protect their information, protect it from being used against them. We are allowed to tell the hospital, we're allowed to tell like insurance, but we do have to get permission from them. And you'll see signatures. Anytime you've gone to the hospital, they're like, we need you to sign this thing, and you never read it, but that's what it is. You are signing a release for them to give that information to your insurance to be billed. There's a bunch of different handouts out here that will help you through the class. The very bottom one, if you guys are struggling with anything and you need to cope, there is some pretty fun coping skills, 99 different ones that you can look at, and you can pass them to friends and kids, and they're just little ways to cope with stress. So that's how you find that. Your Zoom meetings, as I get them, will be posted in here. So right now I've only got the audio because it takes more than 90 minutes to upload from the cloud. So we'll see how that goes. But at least the audio will be on there right away, and then the video will come up afterwards. Remember to get your discussion boards in. There is 4 of them attached with this module. So we've got a 75-year-old man with a DNR. We've got 2 trolley questions and 1 suicidal female. And then we've got your Patty's document. With your medical legal questions, think about how you would answer, and think about how a lawyer would tear your answer apart, because that's what a lot of these ambulance chasers will do. They will find anything that could have possibly been wrong about your interpretation of the call, I actually had a chief that on his paperwork stated that the patient smelled of alcohol. And when he was brought into court, the lawyer was like, well, what does alcohol smell like? It smells like alcohol. Like, how do you justify your answer? And you've got a plethora of people staring down at you, and you have to tell them how you would describe somebody that smells like alcohol. So lawyers, they have their way of wording things that stress you out. So think about how you would answer those discussion boards, but also think of like the devil's advocate. Think of how you would kind of tear that apart. Could you murder somebody for the good of others, or could that family sue you because you didn't help? So think of both ways the answers could go, and then decide on which is correct. There really is no right answer or wrong answer. This is mainly about having you think of how you can be sued. When you guys write these patient care reports, this is their medical record, and you could be subpoenaed years later, and you got to be able to remember why you made the decisions that you did. So being able to cover your own butt is going to come back. It's going to come back and get you one of these days. I've been subpoenaed before, and it's not fun. With mandatory reporting, there's an entire section on mandatory reporting. All school professionals, bus drivers, healthcare workers, we all have mandatory reporting. If we believe a child is in any danger, we have to report it as soon as possible. We cannot dilly-dally around, and actually you can be found guilty of a misdemeanor if you wait too long and you don't make your report. So let's say step parent is abusing a child and you don't say anything, and biological parent finds out that you knew years later or months later, they can sue you because you didn't say anything and you knew something. So it's actually better to get the word out. And if you're wrong, then you're wrong. You're protected from making that kind of a statement. But if you're right, you could save that child's life. You could prevent that child from becoming an abuser later down the line. Like, there is a whole butterfly effect that can happen. We have to do mandatory reporting on knife wounds, and not like I'm chopping onions, but anything that's intentional, either to themselves or somebody else. We need to do mandatory reporting on fires, and it's 5% of the body if it's second degree or third degree. That doesn't mean that anytime that somebody gets burned, sticking their hand up getting a pizza pan needs to be reported. It needs to be 5% of their body, second degree or higher. Yes, they can have their entire arm burned, but if this is all first degree, but only right here is second degree, that doesn't count. 1% is the patient's hand. So think of 5 of their hands, not my hand. My hand is tiny, so it would not work for really small people like children, and it wouldn't work for giant people. So 1% of their body is their hand. So second and third degree. And it's not because we're not making the report for ramifications. We don't want people to necessarily get in trouble. This is a lot of statistical information. It helps give us grants for education, for public education. It helps get us resources for our hospitals. Right now, we don't have a burn center. We have to fly everybody that's significant out to Washington. If we started having a lot more fire injuries, there would be more funding for our hospitals to get more burn treatment. So don't think of it as you're tattling on people that have burns. Think of it as you're protecting our state by giving us more education, more funding, and more support for our fire protection. So that's why we do our fire reports. On that PowerPoint shows the website where you can make your burn report with like gunshot wounds, with knife wounds. You can tell a trooper, a police officer, but with the child abuse reports, you have to call or you have to make your online report yourself. You cannot just tell a trooper that what you think is going on. Mandy and I were on a call, and I think I made a report and she made a report and the police officers made a report, and I'm pretty sure everybody even that showed up on the scene for a second made a report. I don't think they found anything from it, but you know, it was worth it. I would make that report again if I could. Let's see. Do we have to do reports on spousal abuse, domestic violence? Do we have to make, is that a mandatory report?
In the test quiz, it said that we needed to report it to public safety, your law enforcement. It didn't say anything else beyond that.
It's one of those areas where we don't have to report it, and I will tell the trooper if they're involved, and if there's violence, I'm going to get the trooper involved for my safety. But actual spousal abuse is not mandatory reporting. And that's because they believe the person is an adult and they can make that decision. And it's one of those frustrating things that you'll have in EMS, whether you're in fire, if you're an ambulance, or any public safety. So you do police or anything like that. It's very frustrating to have a spouse that is getting beaten up and keeps going back. And there's really nothing that we can do because they are of sound mind. They are an adult. It's super stressful, but it is not a mandatory report. The mandatory report is going to be people that are not of sound mind or cannot make those judgments. So under 18 or developmentally challenged, and you're elderly. It does talk about sexual abuse and sexual exploitation. There is a difference. Sexual exploitation is going to be your child pornography and things like that. It is an abuse, but it is not actual like physical sexual contact. So, and that goes for children as well as your elderly and your mentally disabled or handicapped. Will you stop it? I think that is all 4 chapters broken down. The exam module is 50 points. Should be, I think there's 25 questions and they're worth 2 points apiece. It's a small module, so there's only like 25 questions. Some of the bigger modules will have 50 questions worth 1 point apiece. Please don't use a book. Try to answer these questions on your own because it's going to be for your benefit. It's going to help you get through it through the course, and it's going to help you get through the final, which is going to be all of the chapters. It's got a section it's got questions from every single section. So try not to use your book. There's no way for us to catch you doing it or Googling it on your phone, but you're only harming yourself. So have the integrity to try to do this closed book. It is all the way through chapter 1 through 4. There is going to be critical thinking involved. So with all of these questions you guys are going to have, there's essentially 3 right answers and 1 wrong. So you can throw that one out. Now you have to rule out which one is the best. So if one of them's right, but you don't have to do it, and then there's one where you're like, this has to be done on every single call regardless, that's going to be your answer. So you have to learn how to compare which one's better of the right answers. Does that make sense? It's kind of how National Registry is going to do all of their tests, and these are written out of a book. They come from a test bank, and that's how a lot of their questions are going to be like. A lot of adult education is not necessarily learning new stuff. It's learning how to test and learning how to answer the way other people want you to answer. So a lot of this class is those quizzes are teaching you how to take a test. So start to pay attention on how their wording is and how they're going to show you, stop it. They're going to show you 3 right answers and you got to pick one. Sorry, my dog is trying to escape. Let's see. Do you guys have any questions specific about any of these topics?
My only question is, okay, so that one that we brought up about mandatory reporting. So in the quiz question, that one about spousal abuse, we had already talked about that before, so I didn't select it. So I selected one about a 12-year-old child, and I got it wrong. So if that question comes up again in the module exam, how do you want me to get that to you?
I don't know the aspects or what was going on with the question, what was surrounding it. Maybe there wasn't something that needed to be mandatorily reported with the 12-year-old. And so it was trying to trick you just by throwing in that 12-year-old in there. So I guess I would have to see what question it was, and I could probably find that somewhere. But with the spousal abuse, if there's a gun involved, that makes it mandatory. If there's a knife involved, it makes it mandatory. If they were burnt, that makes it mandatory, but in a fire reporting kind of sense, or anything that results in the patient's death. So there is some areas where you would have to make the mandatory report with the spouse, but just because Bobby beats Sally or whatever else, I can use, I guess, neutral names. So Bobby and Joe, you can't tell which one's which, are beating each other up. It doesn't make it mandatory reporting. So I hope that kind of clarifies it. Because, yeah, I'd have to see what the question was itself and see why. Like I said, there's going to be 3 right answers, but one of them is going to be the most right. Does that help, Rose?
Yeah, I'll send it to you, because the answer that I chose was, I don't know, this 12-year-old was home alone and both parents are at work. And I chose that because I'm like, okay, why is this kid, for me, is a little bit too young to be home alone. And then he's needing emergency assistance.
In the state of Alaska, 12-year-old and most states is legally allowed to be home alone. Just FYI. And 11 is old enough to babysit your siblings. So, not anybody else, but your siblings. Just FYI.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I had a struggle with the emergency, urgent, and non-emergent movement part of the movement part. And I really struggled with the emergency and the urgent difference.
So we should always do everything with sort of sense of purpose. So urgent is going to be minimal that we need to protect like the spine. So putting them on like a spine board and getting them out. Emergent is going to be forget the spine board. We need to get them out because the thing's on fire. So that's my understanding. Is urgent or like immediate is going to be the bare minimum, no time spent except for the minimum that we need on scene. And there will be times where you have to do emergent, which is going to be you basically support the head, you support the neck, and you just kind of drag them out. I don't know if there's going to be questions specifically asking you which one's going to be which, though, I hope.
Well, that's actually what drove this. Is one of the questions on it was you have called to a house of a patient, you arrive, the back of the house, you see smoke and fire, you have 2 to 3 minutes to get the patient out. What do you use? Which, of course, they said emergency because the house is on fire. Then they had another one that you are in an MVC and the car is on fire under the hood, and then they used urgent instead of emergency to put them on a longboard and get them out of the car.
Hell no. I would have ripped him out.
Me too. So that's why I was like, okay,
I think I know.
because it's a
For
I saw one back.
can you guys hear me?
Yeah, who's talking? Gina.
This is Gina. Yeah, I was gonna say for that question, I think I know why they said it's urgent care, because you were specifically taking them out of the vehicle onto a board, and so the transition of person to board is urgent.
Yeah, and they talk.
my thing is it forever to get them onto a board?
They're looking at mechanism of injury as well. So
Okay.
the chance that you have somebody with a spinal issue in the front of their house or whatever versus an MVC is a little bit different.
Yeah, so that would be like the minimal necessary. The minimum necessary is going to be the urgent. But if you don't need to do anything minimally necessary except drag them out, I guess would be your emergency.
I guess if the car's on fire, I think there's more time in the house than there was in the car, and it was backwards to me. That's where I was having the hard part with that.
Yeah,
These are national registry questions that really suck and we don't like them very much, but we have to learn how to take them.
Oh, no, I'm used to them. I did them before. I get that. I just wanted to make sure that I was understanding why. Now that you said the mechanism of injury, it makes more sense that they probably have some spine injury as opposed to just being sick in the home.
Yes.
That was it.
All right. Who else?
We don't have anything on the chat that hasn't already been answered.
Okay. So everybody, the discussion boards, like I showed you before, to get an idea of like how to answer those, watch the lecture on medical legal, because it'll kind of cover each one of those sections individually about like the DNR and stuff, and know those definitions of what your duty to act, a breach of that duty, proximate cause, and damages, because there will be questions on your exam about those. So knowing if you are on duty, you have a duty to act. If you were walking around Fred Meyer with a shirt on that says you are a medical provider, so an EMT shirt, and you walk by somebody that needed care and you didn't render care, there is a huge area there where you're assumed to be on duty and that you had a duty to act. So unless you plan on dropping everything and responding, I don't wear a whole lot of EMS shirts because I don't want to be caught off guard and somebody saw me and I didn't necessarily see what was going on, or I didn't render aid. I don't want to be caught in that situation. So even stuff like that will make you on duty. Or if you are the only person in town and everybody knows that you're the medical provider, everybody assumes you're always on duty. And that kind of sucks because you have to announce when you're not on duty. Because if they assume you're on duty, you're on duty. It's one of those.
There was a question in one of the exams about that where a woman was going to her doctor's appointment and passed an incident. I don't remember what it was, but she had a license plate that said she was EMS, and somebody wrote down her license plate number, and she was in the wrong because she didn't stop.
Exactly. That's why I don't have a license plate that says EMS on it, because I don't want to drive by, because maybe I have places I got to go and I don't have time to stop and it looks like they're okay, or I didn't really realize what was going on, or somebody else is driving my vehicle. And then I don't want to get caught up in that kind of thing. So you have to be very aware of what you're wearing. If you're not going to be able to respond, don't wear that kind of apparel. If you are able to respond, absolutely. So just be aware of what you're wearing. If you come to the Alaska State Fair, there is a group, so there's a couple APV guys that work at the fair. They're the ones in charge of the medical that happens at the fair. If you show up at the fair wearing gear, people are going to assume that you're there to help. So please do not wear any EMS gear at the fair unless you are working under APV, because it gets very confusing and people don't know where to go. So there's a lot of like t-shirt medics, I call them, because they walk around with radios blasting and medical apparel all over them, usually first year people. So try to be mindful of like what you're wearing and how that can represent you. Anything else? Questions, comments, snide remarks?
There's one discussion board. Bree, is there only 3 for this module?
So there should be 3 medical legal ones, which will be old man, suicidal, and then the 2 trolleys. You can let her out. You can take both of them out. Go outside, go play. And then the patty documentation one. You guys are gonna learn about soap notes, but try your best to write a chart on patty. You guys are gonna learn terms that are gonna be in there, but try to document it as best as you can, because if you document what you did and see, then it will save you years down the road if you have to be pulled into the courtroom for it. So document everything that you did. If you didn't write it down, you didn't do it. So let's say Patty broke his leg and you just said broken leg, but you didn't say which one. That could come up and bite you, because it's going to be like, well, which leg was it? Because now he's got numbness and tingling and you didn't document which leg it was and whether you did pulse motor sensory before and after. So that kind of stuff can come back and you're like, well, I don't remember which one it was and I don't remember exactly what we did, but I'm a good medic, so I'm pretty sure I did. So if you don't document it, there's no way to back yourself up.
I was going to make a comment when you were talking about uniforms and that type of stuff. Also beware if you're wearing something that represents medical or whatever, what you're doing. If you're at the bar and you're drunk and dancing on a table, please don't have on your EMS shirt. Okay, or you're out smoking or doing other things that, yes, we all as medical professionals know that we probably shouldn't be, but we still have those habits. Just beware what you're wearing when you're doing that, because you are an example to your community. So that's just an ethics part of it.
All right, I think it's everybody's questions. You guys look at your notes and what you've done and read your readings, do your discussion board, watch your PowerPoints. I don't know if there's an exact due date made on the discussion boards, because you guys are able to read one another's and get responses back. But I think that's it for the Zoom meeting today, unless you guys have any other questions. And feel free to message Mandy or Ashley. You can always message me. It might take me a little longer to get answers back, because I've got a lot of other things going on with this course, trying to update things and make more PowerPoints for you guys. So I might be a little slower than those two will, even though Mandy's got quite the load there and Ashley's probably wicked busy as well. So that's it. That's all I got.
Well, I
have no life.
All right. You guys are feel free to bounce out. I will get this posted on the My Brady as soon as I can.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.